How's it going, peeps? Oh, wait, no. Hey, yo, peeps. How's it going? So, the Final Fantasy XIV Revenge trailer dropped just recently during the Video Game Awards, and your boy unfortunately didn't manage to see it because it was 2 a.m. on a working night, and I couldn't exactly turn up late to work, citing the reason of I stayed up late watching video games. I would be on the fucking street. So, I'm not gonna be able to give you a live reaction. Instead, I'm gonna give you something a little bit more useful. Basically, what I'm going to do is I'm going to use the knowledge that I have playing Devil May Cry and the knowledge that I have from the Final Fantasy lore to basically give you some insight as to what exactly you saw and you might have missed in the Final Fantasy XVI Revenge trailer. Remember, the reason why this is relevant is because the Final Fantasy XVI team, Creative Business Unit 3, actually has the combat designer from Devil May Cry working with them. So you'll see a lot of the action game's DNA in the RPG's combat system. And I just wanted to basically give you a bit of insight as to what you can basically expect from this series and maybe, hey, get a little bit hyped about it. So I know this is a little bit different from what I normally do, but I hope you enjoy this analysis anyway. And without further ado, let's get right into it. Right, so let's start with the first 20 seconds. It takes us straight to a combat scene where Clive immediately teleports towards an enemy and does an aerial combo before slamming the enemy back to the ground. One thing you may notice is that Torgal, the dog, launches the two enemies up in the air with a single flip. Notice that for a brief moment, Clive becomes incorporeal before reappearing next to the enemy in the air. Now, this is very similar to Dante's Trickster move, where he's able to essentially teleport towards the enemy. Now, if you observe closely at Clive's 3-hit combo, it looks actually extremely familiar. That's because it's actually the same 3-hit aerial combo that Nero does in Devil May Cry 5. So whilst we could see some similarities, there is one main thing that separates Clive from his action hero predecessors, and that is his ability to call on the powers of multiple icons. These take the form of extremely cinematic moves that, despite having a hefty startup animation, have a wide range. In particular, Nero does have some very powerful ultimate attacks in his repertoire that do in fact take a long time to start up. For example, Showdown. However, its range doesn't cover nearly as much as Clive, who can be seen clearing an entire alleyway within a single strike. Now, because Clive isn't being hit during these startup animations of these powerful spells, it's difficult to tell if Clive actually has iframes during their casts. For context, let's take Nero's Showdown. Before the actual attack comes out, there is a very long charge time beforehand. This leaves Nero extremely vulnerable, and if he does get hit, the actual cast for the attack is interrupted. So, players circumvent this by either leaving enemies in a vulnerable state where they can't react to the long charge time, or protect themselves by using Nero's right trigger punch during the charge time to attack any enemies that get too close. Here we don't see Clive using anything of the sort when setting up, except for maybe a few exceptions which we will cover later. So it's possible that these ultimate attacks, let's call them, do put Clive in a state of invulnerability, just like how they did in Final Fantasy XV. This is probably to ease the barrier of entry for this game, as although it is an action game, it's still an RPG, and that's normally catered to Final Fantasy fans who probably aren't used to the genre. Here's another example of Final Fantasy XVI using the same fundamentals but different execution. Here we see Ramuh's lightning shock being used as a way to stun the enemy to set up new combos. Well, Dante can do the exact same thing with Cerberus, shooting balls of lightning instead, albeit at a slower pace and probably with less effectiveness in terms of stun locking. Nevertheless, both of these are excellent ways to start a combo, as Clive and Dante can both be seen using these openings to start a fiery assault. Whilst Clive seems stronger at first glance, it may be possible that elemental resistances might be in the game and would therefore reduce their effectiveness, and you have to bear in mind that Clive doesn't actually have any guns. Though, I would be welcome to have him use guns at some point in the story. I'm just saying, CBU3, if you want to put it in, I'm not stopping you. We're then treated to the Icon's combat system. We are finally able to see it from a third-person perspective, so this is definitely the actual direct gameplay. This also confirms that this will not be taking place in a 2D Street Fighter format, and instead continues in Final Fantasy XVI's action game format. Now, looking at the attacks from both this trailer and the previous trailers, we saw a lot of very cinematic attacks, which looked like they were pre-rendered cutscenes. So it turns out the engine just looks that good, and this was all in-engine instead. I know this because from the third-person view, as soon as Ifrit connects with a grab, it actually swaps to this new cinematic perspective that we've seen in the previous trailers. What the team is likely doing is borrowing from Nero's contextual grab animations.
And there comes a giant fish!
See, in Devil May Cry, if Nero successfully grabs onto an enemy with his Devil Bringer, he does a unique grapple animation that is specific to it. These can range from being short and sweet to being flashy affairs, which could in itself be their own fights. Now, not all enemies by default are vulnerable to being grabbed. Sometimes you have to weaken them before you can do that. And this is likely what is going to be happening in Final Fantasy XIV, where if you weaken the opposing icon enough, you will then be able to go into a very cinematic grab which takes off a lot of their HP. Alternatively, seeing as how Ifrit lost an arm in the last trailer, I'm guessing the same could happen to you. Now, given that it is unlikely that you'll have the same tool sets once you're in Ifrit form, is this gonna have another layer to it? Maybe perhaps your stats will be tied to your performance? Because right now it seems like it will just be a very simplistic set piece rather than any truly challenging gameplay, though I would love to be proven wrong. Now we have our first look into the party composition. Because Yoshi P said that emphasis will be on solo combat, it is highly unlikely that you will be able to control party members individually like in Final Fantasy VII Remake. In the footage you can see them sort of just hovering around, so it's likely that we'll be using Final Fantasy VII Remake's AI. It may be possible that just like Final Fantasy XV, we may be able to command our party members to cast powerful spells or abilities. In fact, in the very next few seconds you see Cid dramatically unleash lightning sorcery upon his foes. Wait, now let's pause for a second. Cid, lightning. Remember, this team is Creative Business Unit 3, who worked on Final Fantasy XIV, who a lot of the members worked on the Ivalice series like Final Fantasy XII, and Final Fantasy's Tactics, hence the Ivalice raids that appeared in Final Fantasy XIV. Now, in Final Fantasy Tactics, there is also another person named Cid, better known as Cidolfus Orlando, or the Thunder God. Now, considering that this character's full name is also Cidolfus, and he's actually the dominant of Ramuh, a Thunder God, by the way, well, need I say more? Also play Final Fantasy Tactics. Speaking about his lightning spell, actually look closely. Those aren't just mere thunderbolts, you can actually see visages of knights. And it's not just merely one or two, it's quite a lot. One might even say a gathering of them. Now, it's not confirmed, but it's entirely possible that this is a reference or maybe a direct iteration of the Knights of the Round summon used first in Final Fantasy VII. This character is clearly steeped in tradition, and I cannot wait to see him fully in action. Now check out this neat little dodge that Clive does. Given the heavily emphasized nature of it with the slowdown, it leads me to believe that this dodge would have had to happen just before the attack hit. Well, its flip actually looks very similar to that of Table Hopper, a move that only Nero and Virgil can do. It is executed by performing a dodge just before the enemy lands their attack on you. What's special about it is that its recovery animation is a lot shorter than a normal dodge, meaning that you're allowed to take action a lot quicker, meaning you can retaliate with much slower attacks than you would normally use. This moment is what I meant when I said I'm not entirely sure if these special icon attacks have any iframes, because if that were the case, why would Clive need to go into a dodge in order to use Terra Flare? Why couldn't he just use it straight when he was being attacked? Why did he have to dodge beforehand before using that spell? Style points? Yeah, sure, would fit. I mean, this is just judgment kill. Okay, but on a serious note, you can actually see the enemies float in the air very briefly after Clive finishes using Zantetsuken. I wonder if you can combo off the super just like in, say, Guilty Gear, for example. With how strong this attack is, it's highly likely that this might be tied into some resource system. In fact, it's highly likely that all of these icon attacks will be tied to some cooldown-based resource system, because if you were allowed to just freely use these powerful moves, then the game would definitely be way too easy. In Devil May Cry, you gain access to these moves by basically hitting enemies a lot and then building up a meter. So perhaps they might do something quite similar for Final Fantasy. And on some smaller news, it seems that chocobos are rideable. Now, they did mention that the game is not open world, but it seems to have some pretty vast areas, so it's likely it's going to be using the Final Fantasy XII or XIII format of instance levels to allow some limited exploration. And I think that just about covers it of all the important things. Just fucking kidding, you can pet the fucking dog! Game of the year, baby! It hasn't even come out yet! Fuck yeah! Hey yo peeps, if you made it this far, thank you for watching my video. I appreciate you watching all the way to the end. In case you are wondering, I mainly like to do PvP gameplay and builds for RPGs like Final Fantasy XIV and Elden Ring. I also occasionally dabble in FPSs like Apex Legends and Call of Duty. However, if you enjoyed this analytical type of content, then let me know in the comment section down below and give this video a like, and I'll be sure to do more. If that all sounds good to you, hey, maybe subscribe and stick around. Alright, well, that's all from me. Take care folks, and stay frosty. Goodbye.